Have you ever noticed that most of the smooth decisions in your life are born from a very ancient fear? The fear of being disliked, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of no longer belonging. You call it kindness, maturity, being considerate. But Nietzsche would not use such pleasant words. He would ask bluntly, are you living, or are you negotiating your existence in exchange for acceptance? Conflict makes people uncomfortable, not because it is loud, but because it forces you to reveal yourself. In conflict, you cannot hide behind the role of the good person, cannot take refuge in polite silence, cannot borrow the morality of the crowd to escape responsibility. This video is not a call to argue, nor a lesson in winning or losing. It forces you to look straight at very small moments. When you stay silent, even though you know you should speak. When you nod, while inwardly opposing. When you call retreat wisdom, just so you do not have to endure the feeling of being disliked. It is precisely at these points that freedom does not disappear loudly. It is eroded bit by bit, until your life is no longer chosen by you, but dictated by fear. If you want to be free, stop being afraid of conflict. If you are ready to face that, stay. Nietzsche does not promise comfort. He promises only one thing: truth and the price you must pay to possess it. Number 1. Fear of conflict does not come from kindness, but from the need to be accepted. Many people like to believe that they avoid conflict because they are kind, gentle, because they do not want to hurt anyone. But if we look closely at the psychological and philosophical layers Nietzsche exposes, we see a less flattering truth. People do not fear conflict because of kindness. They fear conflict because they fear being expelled from the herd. They fear being disliked, fear others' gazes more than they fear the shame of betraying themselves. Nietzsche delivered this as a slap to moral illusion in Beyond Good and Evil. In individuals, madness is rare. In groups, it is the rule. And what is called gentle, not causing trouble, always keeping the peace, is sometimes just a polished version of the fear of being expelled from the safety circle. Society rewards agreeableness, not truth. And so people learn to edit themselves like candidates making it to the final round of a moral interview. They hide anger so as not to be seen as immature, hide ambition so as not to be seen as selfish, swallow disagreement so as not to be seen as difficult. But Nietzsche calls this herd morality, a system where nice, considerate, gentle, not making anyone uncomfortable, become standards of survival. And he would look straight at us, without blinking. You are not kind. You are merely shrinking to fit someone else's mold. When a child grows up in an environment where every act of dissent is labeled disrespectful, every demand labeled ungrateful, every expression of personal need punished or met with withdrawal, that child does not learn to love peace. The child learns to survive by dulling their own sharp edges. Such a child grows into the adults you meet every day, the one who smiles while storms rage inside, who yields while collapsing, who uses the phrase "it's fine" as a talisman, yet lies awake at night because they themselves have vanished. Fear of conflict is not morality. It is the legacy of domestication. A clear example is Ethan, a marketing specialist who for 3 years did not dare tell his manager that the team was being excessively exploited. Raised in a family that always taught, don't cause trouble, be agreeable, don't make anyone uncomfortable, Ethan entered the workplace with an unspoken law deeply embedded in him: stay silent to stay safe. And the price of that safety was his own voice. He clearly saw the injustice: unreasonable deadlines, workloads beyond capacity, colleagues burning out. He wrote feedback emails, then deleted them. He planned to speak up in meetings, then withdrew behind a smile. Ethan did not fear debate. He feared being labeled difficult, feared being isolated, feared losing his place in the group. And the price he paid was a life that gradually shrank, a quiet sense of helplessness that grew each day. Ethan did not avoid conflict for peace. Ethan avoided conflict because he feared being separated from the collective. That is not morality. It is fear wrapped in politeness. Imagine a wolf separated from its pack. Wolves are wild creatures, but once alone, they are desperate. They fear hunger, fear attack, fear having nowhere to belong. Modern humans are no different. They trade away their wild instinct for the safety of the crowd, and in doing so trade away the capacity for conflict, the foundation of freedom. Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "You look too peaceful to me, you followers of the good. Peaceful are you, but your peace is weakness." That peace is not virtue. It is paralysis disguised as righteousness. Most people who avoid conflict are not as noble as they imagine. They do not refrain because they fear hurting others. They do not say no because they fear being disliked. They do not demand because they fear losing their position. They do not defend themselves because they fear losing their image. They do not live authentically because they fear losing the crowd. And then they dress that fear in refined language. I choose peace. But Nietzsche would ask a single question, ripping away the curtain. Are you choosing peace, or are you choosing acceptance? If you want freedom, remember this. Freedom does not come from pleasing everyone. Freedom comes from daring to bear the price of truth. Harmony bought with silence is always more expensive than conflict bought with honesty. And as long as your hands tremble at the thought of saying what you think, you are not yet living. You are merely clinging to a ticket that keeps you inside a circle Nietzsche would coldly tell you to shatter before it shatters you. Number 2. Avoiding conflict is the fastest way to lose the right to define yourself. And from the moment you see the fear behind kindness, the next step becomes unavoidable. Realizing that avoiding conflict is the fastest way to lose the right to define yourself. Escaping conflict is not merely a behavior, it is a declaration that you allow others to determine your boundaries. Every time you remain silent when you should speak, you sign an invisible contract. I accept being defined by others. Nietzsche called this the most subtle form of slavery, where no one binds you, no one threatens you, yet you retreat simply to be accepted. Slave morality needs no chains. It operates through the fear of making others uncomfortable. Nietzsche warned in Beyond Good and Evil, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. In Greek mythology, when Prometheus stole fire and gave it to humanity, he did not avoid conflict. He confronted Zeus directly, the most powerful being in the universe, knowing the punishment would be horrific. Prometheus was chained to a cliff and had his liver eaten daily by an eagle. But what matters is not the pain, it is the posture. Prometheus chose conflict to preserve his right to define value. He did not allow Zeus to impose the limits of what was permitted. Nietzsche deeply admired such figures, those willing to pay the price of freedom. Not because they win, but because they refuse to bow. If you replace Prometheus with a modern figure, the contrast becomes painful. Most people today need no Zeus to punish them. They punish themselves with silence. Elena, a woman in her 30s, spent 3 years in a relationship that continually shrank her. Each time her partner made unreasonable criticisms, she wanted to respond, but swallowed them to avoid arguments. When her needs were ignored, she wanted to speak, but stayed silent to keep the peace. When she felt disrespected, she wanted to set boundaries, but told herself, "It's nothing." 3 years like this turned Eleanor into a shadow of herself, gentle on the surface, exhausted inside. No one took her voice from her. She traded her right to define herself for short-term calm. Nietzsche would say plainly, Elena did not avoid conflict out of love. She avoided conflict out of fear of losing the role of the good person, fear of being abandoned, fear of standing alone. What is terrifying is not conflict itself. What is terrifying is that if you do not dare enter conflict, you lose the ability to draw your own boundaries. Nietzsche consistently emphasized that a strong individual is one who sets their own law. But how can you set law if you do not dare say no? How can you become a singular being if at the smallest friction you choose retreat? How can there be freedom when your entire life is built on silences? Look at modern life. People avoid conflict not for peace, but out of fear of facing their full selves. Conflict forces clarity. This is what I want. This is what I do not accept. This is my boundary. But when you refuse to affirm these things, the world will do it for you. A life without conflict is a life programmed by others. Conflict is not war. Conflict is the collision between two beings. If you always avoid it, it means you have never shown the world your true form. You live as a shadow, as volume turned down, as a low-resolution version of yourself. You become someone others find easy to work with, but not someone who can work with themselves. Nietzsche wants you to grasp this truth, however unpleasant. Freedom does not come from harmony. It comes from daring to say what no one wants to hear but you know to be true. And the question Nietzsche wants you to ask right now is, if I avoid conflict, who is living in my place? Who is defining the person I must become? Because you cannot be free if you do not dare endure the first noise of truth. And when you finally step into conflict as a natural part of life, you will understand what Nietzsche said all his life. Freedom is not a reward. Freedom is the consequence of someone who dares to stand upright. If, while hearing this, you suddenly recall a moment when you stayed silent just to be kept, share that story in the comments. No polish, no explanations. Just name it once, because what is not spoken continues to rule you, even when you think you have forgotten it. Number 3. Conflict is not violence, but a test of being. Have you ever asked yourself, what remains in you when consensus disappears? That is the moment the true being emerges from beneath the social shell. Like a black stone long covered in soft moss, only when the water recedes do you see its true shape. Humans are the same. Only when no one stands behind you, when applause fades and agreement vanishes, do you see the truth about yourself. Can you stand on your own, or do you exist only through the support of the crowd? Conflict for Nietzsche has nothing to do with aggression, quarrels, or imposition. Conflict is the most minimal experiment of being. Can you hold yourself when opposed? Conflict does not measure volume. It measures the stability of the inner axis. You can speak beautifully when everyone nods, be authentic when people praise your courage, live your truth when no one objects. But that is not truth. It is a simulated environment. Only disagreement is the real test. Neuroscience shows that when humans are opposed, the amygdala, the threat detection center, lights up instantly. The brain does not distinguish between someone disagrees with me and my life is being threatened. That is why fear of conflict is essentially fear of being expelled from the group, something that once meant death in prehistoric times. This is why the more intelligent, considerate and reflective a person is, the more they fear conflict. They do not fear logic, they fear losing shelter. But Nietzsche saw through this biological mechanism and warned, if you let herd instinct run your inner life, you will never be free. He said, he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Meaning, if you have an inner anchor, external noise will not shake you. Without it, you will disintegrate at a single frown. Conflict, in Nietzsche's sense, is not about breaking peace. It is about enduring friction to keep your inner axis straight. When you say, I disagree, you affirm something more important than the statement itself. You prove you have boundaries. When you ask why, you declare that your consciousness is not the property of the crowd. And when you hold your ground under uncomfortable gazes, you prove you have roots. This is why Nietzsche saw moments of opposition as decisive milestones of freedom. Not because you must win arguments, but because you must defeat the reflex to shrink. When someone frowns at the truth you speak, when someone is uncomfortable with the boundary you set, when the room grows cold because you refuse to yield, that is when your being is measured with greatest precision. And if you look closely, you will see that the destruction caused by constant conflict avoidance does not occur outside, it unfolds quietly within you. Each time you withdraw a value to avoid discomfort, that value dulls. Each time you edit yourself to please others, another layer blurs your being. Eventually, no one needs to oppress you. You become a version processed to suit the crowd. At the deepest level, conflict is the fire test of being. A common metal bends when heated. A noble metal retains its line even under extreme pressure. Human being is the same. Though strong only when supported, will deform instantly when opposed. Only those with solid inner structure keep their axis despite pressure. Thus, Nietzsche wants you to understand that conflict does not create character. It merely reveals the character you already have. When you are opposed, you have nowhere to hide. You must stand on your own feet. And the one who dares enter disagreement, even with trembling hands, is the one who first touches the threshold of freedom. For freedom never belongs to those who have never tested themselves under even the smallest pressure. It belongs to those solid enough not to shrink under a cold gaze, those who understand that being is not given, but proven in moments when no one stands with you. Number 4, will to power. And from that very point where being is tested by fire, we move to the deeper layer Nietzsche wanted humanity to face. The will to power arises only when life places before you an opposing force strong enough to force you to expand yourself. In Nietzsche's thought, life never stands still. It always reaches outward, always seeks to exceed its previous form. But this tendency does not ignite in comfort. Without pressure, there is no will. Without resistance, there is no strength. When life becomes too smooth, people do not grow. They merely repeat themselves in small cycles. Nietzsche saw a truth few want to admit. Your strongest part emerges only when something corners you and forces you to choose, shrink, or transcend. Will to power is not ambition to dominate the world. It is the capacity not to diminish yourself, before any opposing force. It is the ability to expand from within, precisely where you once thought yourself weakest. In Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche wrote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger, not because suffering has moral value, but because resistance forces the spirit to find new structures to avoid breaking. Strength lies not in injury, but in how you reorganize yourself after impact." Consider the story of Mira, a young product designer working in Tokyo. For 2 years, she was praised as easy to work with, considerate, never difficult. But one day, a project fell behind schedule due to a decision she had known from the start was wrong. She saw the risk, wanted to speak, but stayed silent for fear of being troublesome. That mistake forced the team to redo nearly everything. That day, sitting alone, Mira admitted a painful truth. She had not failed because she lacked skill. She had failed because she did not dare face conflict. That impact, the opposition she should have created but avoided, woke her. From then on, Mira began to state her views clearly, even with trembling hands. Strangely, as she stood upright, her colleagues began to respect her. Not because she won arguments, but because she was no longer a copy programmed to be agreeable. Her will to power emerged precisely where she once bowed her head. Conflict in Nietzsche's sense is not about becoming aggressive. Conflict is the condition that activates inner structure, like pressure forcing a seed to break its shell. You do not know your strength until an opposing force demands its use. And what sets Nietzsche apart from moral philosophers is that he does not first ask how you treat others. He asks whether you are strong enough to take responsibility for the form you choose. Will to power is the only answer life respects. If you observe closely the moments when you grew strongest, you will see they never came from praise or ease. They came from blocks, objections, limits you thought you could not surpass. Nietzsche did not see these as enemies. He saw them as raw material. The will to power is born when life says no, loudly enough to force you to answer, "I will transcend." In this sense, freedom is not the reward of the gentle, but the disposition of those who do not retreat merely because there is opposition. The key point is this: if you want freedom, you must stop fearing opposing forces, not in philosophy, but in the smallest situations of daily life. Opposition is the moment you need to say no, but your throat tightens. It is the meeting where you know you are right, but stay silent to keep things moving. It is the boundary you must set with a partner, family member, colleague, yet step back for fear of upsetting them. In these very concrete moments, life is asking you a simple question. Do you want truth, or do you want comfort? If you want to continue exploring the layers of thought Nietzsche used to strip away domestication, fear, and the mechanisms that cause people to shrink themselves, subscribe to the channel. Not to find consolation, but to continue facing questions that do not allow you to return to living as before. Every video here does not promise peace. It keeps you in the zone where being still has a chance to expand. Number 5. The one who fears conflict is the one who fears having their true strength exposed. And if the essence of the will to power only appears when there is resistance, then the next thing you must face directly is this. People do not fear conflict because it is uncomfortable. They fear conflict because it strips them bare. In everyday life, anyone can perform calmness, maturity, and understanding. But conflict is where all performances fall away, and a person is placed before a single question. How strong are you when there is nowhere left to hide? Nietzsche understood that most human fear does not lie in being opposed, but in being seen at one's true size. No exaggeration, no shrinking, no embellishment. Conflict is the most merciless mirror. It does not let you borrow anyone else's light, does not allow you to lean on consensus, does not let you score points through agreeableness. It forces you to appear not as the image you create, but as the entity you actually are, with your full measure of strength, weakness, and truth. There are people who speak with great confidence as long as the other person nods. But the moment someone disagrees, their voice immediately drops in volume. There are people who live very properly, very stably, as long as no one challenges them. But let a conversation drift even slightly outside the safe zone, and that entire stability collapses like a paper backdrop. That is why Nietzsche once wrote a sentence that is both cold and precise in maxims and arrows. Only great pain is the ultimate liberator of the spirit. He knew that only in friction does a human being appear truthfully, and that most people fear this exposure more than any pain. I once heard Anna's story at a gathering of friends. When the group suggested splitting the cost evenly for an activity she had not participated in, Anna knew it was unreasonable. She was about to say no, but her throat tightened. She smiled and nodded, not to keep the peace, but because she feared the moment when all eyes would turn toward her, feared the feeling of being exposed outside the role of the one who is always easygoing, always willing, always not a burden. Anna did not fear argument. She feared the moment of admitting something deeply human, that she too has limits and things she does not want to carry. And from that small situation, Anna realized something she had never dared to face before. She did not lack the ability to say no. She simply feared seeing disappointment on her friends' faces more than she feared losing another unreasonable sum of money. At a very concrete level, it was not that she was weak. She was simply not accustomed to living according to her true nature in front of others. That story repeats itself in people more famous than you might think. Marilyn Monroe, an icon of beauty and a Hollywood legend, did not fear the camera, but she constantly feared personal conflict to the point that she could not express her true needs to any director or co-star. Because every time there was disagreement, she felt something no one else could see. The fear of exposing the fragile human being behind the Marilyn symbol. She once wrote in her diary a line that perfectly captures Nietzsche's spirit. "I'm afraid of being seen as I am." She did not fear the spotlight. She feared the gaze that could strip away the halo the world had learned to worship. And it was precisely this fear of exposing her true being that caused her life to shrink inward, even as the world always thought of her as courageous. Nietzsche wants you to realize this. Conflict does not measure morality, temperament, or talent. Conflict measures authenticity. And that is the experiment human beings fear most. Conflict is where you cannot rely on reputation, cannot rely on the past, cannot rely on appearances. Conflict is where your naked will must stand on its own. That is why so many people avoid it at all costs. Not because they are gentle, not because they are generous, but because they do not want to see, and do not want anyone else to see, the true load-bearing capacity of their soul. If you want freedom, you must dare to go there. To the place where you are measured not by titles, but by the steadiness of your spirit. Where no one applauds, where no one nods, where you are forced to answer for yourself, the question Nietzsche spent his entire life forcing humanity to face. When there is no longer consensus to hold you up, what do you have to stand upright with? It is precisely from the moment you dare to step into conflict, not in order to win, but in order to be seen exactly as you are, that freedom begins. Because the one who dares to reveal their true strength, even if it is not yet great, is always stronger than the one who hides for an entire lifetime, just so no one will see that they are weak. Number 6. Eternal recurrence. Would you dare to live this life one more time? And once you see clearly that fear of conflict not only weakens you but also distorts your being, Nietzsche forces you into an even more ruthless question, no longer why you are afraid, but whether you would accept a life created from that fear. Nietzsche called this question eternal recurrence. Not a metaphysical doctrine, not a consolation, but the most merciless test of life. Imagine, Nietzsche says, a demon appears and whispers in your ear, every moment of this life, every smallest action, every silence, every retreat you made in order to be accepted, will repeat infinitely, unchanged, without escape. How would you respond? Would you say yes, or would you curse your own existence? Here, avoiding conflict is no longer a psychological habit. It becomes an existential sentence. A life that avoids conflict is a life programmed to repeat itself in silence. Every time you do not say what needs to be said, every time you do not set a boundary, every time you call retreat wisdom to avoid being disliked, you do not merely lose a moment. You are choosing to repeat that very moment forever. No grand tragedy, no catastrophe, only a steady loop of shrinking. Imagine a gathering of friends where someone makes a joke at your expense. Not too harsh, but enough for you to realize a boundary has just been crossed. And in that instant, you know exactly what you should say. But you do not say it. You laugh along to keep the mood light, to let everything pass smoothly as before. A few gatherings later, the joke returns. Then it returns again. Not because anyone is malicious, but because your silence has become a familiar signal. Here, boundaries can be crossed without consequence. From those repeated silences, a posture of living is formed, a posture of shrinking in order to stay. And only then does Nietzsche pose his question. He does not ask whether you are right or wrong. He asks more bluntly, can you live this life one more time? Because only the one who can say yes to their life, their entire life, including those silences, is free. The one who does not dare to enter conflict is the one who cannot say yes to their life. And the one who cannot say yes to their life is not free, even if no one imprisons them. Modern science, in its own way, confirms this intuition. When people repeatedly avoid conflict, the brain forms familiar loops within the decision-making system. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for conscious choice, gradually yields to avoidance reflex circuits. The brain learns to choose safety over truth. What is frightening is not a single decision, but repetition. Each avoidance reinforces the old pathway, making escape even harder the next time. Biologically, you are not merely choosing silence, you are becoming a person structured for silence. And that is eternal recurrence at the neural level. A life locked into unchallenged reflex loops. Nietzsche understood this before science named it. That is why he did not ask whether you live well. He asked, can you take responsibility for your life if it were to repeat infinitely? Those who avoid conflict do not only fear the present, they fear seeing the present extend forever. Because a life without conflict is not a peaceful life. It is a life that has never been tested by fire. Eternal recurrence does not require you to be aggressive, to wage war, or to seek conflict at all costs. It demands only one ruthless and very simple thing. Do not live a life you would not dare to repeat. If every time you stay silent, some part of you knows you have just betrayed yourself, then understand what Nietzsche is whispering. You are not merely avoiding conflict. You are building a life you yourself do not want to return to. And here, freedom is no longer an abstract concept. Freedom is the ability to look straight at your life and say, I accept it, even if it must repeat. As long as you continue to avoid the small, necessary conflicts required to speak truth, set boundaries, and keep your axis straight, your life remains trapped in a loop Nietzsche would name precisely, a life not yet lived. If you want freedom, do not ask how to avoid conflict. Ask the harder question, would I dare to live the life created by this avoidance one more time? If the answer is no, then it is time to create the first sound, because there is no way to break eternal recurrence except by stepping into the moment you have avoided for far too long. Number 7. The free person does not seek conflict, but never retreats from the truth. At this point, many people may begin to misunderstand Nietzsche. They think he advocates argument, collision, the constant need to prove oneself right. But that is a shallow reading by those still standing within herd morality. The free person, according to Nietzsche, does not live by reactive opposition. They do not seek conflict as a goal, but they also never retreat from the truth simply to preserve approval. The difference lies here. The weak avoid conflict to be loved. The free accept the possibility of being hated in order not to betray themselves. Imagine you are standing on an old suspension bridge connecting two shores. On one side is familiar safety, stable relationships, the image of the good person, the sense of belonging. On the other side is a truth you have long known but never stepped toward, a boundary that must be set, a sentence that must be spoken, a choice that will make you feel alone. The bridge does not break the moment you step onto it. It sways. Each step creates a small inner tremor. If I keep going, what will I lose? And Nietzsche stands there, not comforting, not patting your shoulder, asking only one cold question. Which of these two shores is truly yours? The free person is not someone without fear. The free person is someone who does not allow fear to become the highest authority. When their truth is threatened, they do not react with violence, nor do they hide behind flattering silence. They stand still. And that very posture of standing still creates conflict. Because the world is accustomed to agreeable people, accustomed to bowed heads, accustomed to the phrase, "It's fine." When someone does not retreat, does not ask permission, does not over-explain their truth, the old order immediately feels offended. Nietzsche once wrote a short, cold sentence that cuts straight to the core of inner freedom. He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. This struggle does not take place in public squares. It happens in small, deeply personal moments. When you are asked to compromise with something you know is wrong. When you are invited to soften the truth to make things easier to talk about. When you realize that to be kept, you must be less yourself. There are no war drums there, only a naked choice. Either you stay and shrink yourself, or you step away and accept solitude. Imagine a very ordinary situation. You are in a family meeting or a conversation with longtime friends. A sentence is spoken, seemingly harmless, but it touches directly on something you no longer believe. In the past, you would have laughed it off. You would have changed the subject. You would have told yourself, it's not worth it. But this time, something does not allow you to do that. You speak slowly, not loudly, not angrily, simply saying what you actually think. The room falls silent. Someone feels uncomfortable. Someone looks at you as if you have broken an unspoken agreement. And in that moment, you understand what Nietzsche wanted you to experience for yourself. Conflict does not take away your freedom. Conflict merely reveals whether you have it. According to Nietzsche, freedom is not a pleasant psychological state. Freedom is a posture of being. It is the ability to stand upright when the crowd's guarantee is gone. It is the capacity not to change your tone simply because others' gazes change. And the cost of that posture is always clear. You will not be loved by everyone. You will no longer be the safe choice. You will be misunderstood, labeled, and deprived of the support you once took for granted. But in exchange, you gain something the herd can never give: ownership of yourself. This is the point where Nietzsche forces you to stop, not to nod, but to choose. You do not need to wage war on the world. You do not need to prove your uniqueness. But you must decide one thing, very simple and very ruthless. When your truth and the herd's approval no longer travel together, whom will you follow? There is no middle option. Every delay is merely a way of prolonging betrayal. If you want to be free, stop being afraid of conflict. And Nietzsche's conclusion lies here. Freedom is not the reward of the most agreeable person, but the inevitable consequence of one who does not retreat from their truth. And if that leaves you standing alone for a time, remember this: standing alone in truth is still lighter than living an entire life in a harmony that costs you yourself. At this point, what matters is no longer whether you agree with Nietzsche or not. What matters is whether you dare to remain with the truth that has just been pulled out of you. Because truth always operates in the same ruthless way. It does not need to attack, does not need to persuade, but once it is seen clearly, you cannot return to your old way of living and still respect yourself. If you want to be free, stop being afraid of conflict is not a call to wage war on the world. It is the termination of a silent contract. The contract of using silence to buy acceptance, using self-reduction to secure belonging. Nietzsche does not tell you to become hard or cold. He only forces you to admit one thing. Every time you retreat from the truth in order to be loved, you pay with your very ownership of yourself. If you feel a sting, it means you are standing before an unavoidable choice. Return to be loved in the old way, or move forward to live in a way that does not cost you yourself. And if this video touches exactly what you are going through, like the video and share it with those who are also living in silence. Not to argue, but to remind one another that freedom always has a price, and avoiding conflict is the most expensive way to lose it.